Day 6, 9:32 a.m. It was, I thought, a problem no one had ever imagined before. In all the years that I had been programming agents, the focus had been on getting them to interact in a way that produced useful results. It never occurred to us that there might be a larger control issue, or a question of independence, because it simply couldn't happen. Individual agents were too small to be self-powered. They had to get their energy from some external source, such as a supplied electrical or microwave field. All you had to do was turn off the field and the agents died. The swarm was no more difficult to control than a household appliance, like a kitchen blender. Flip the power off and it went dead. But Ricky was telling me this cloud had been self-sustaining for days. That just didn't make sense. Where is it getting power? He sighed. We built the units with a small piezo wafer to generate current from photons. It's only supplementary. We added it as an afterthought, but they seem to be managing with it alone. So the units are solar powered, I said. Right. Whose idea was that? The Pentagon asked for it. And you built in capacitance? Yeah. They can store charge for 3 hours. Okay, fine, I said. Now we were getting somewhere. So they have enough power for 3 hours. What happens at night? At night, they presumably lose power after 3 hours of darkness. And then the cloud falls apart? Yes. And the individual units drop to the ground? Presumably, yes. Can't you take control of them then? We could, Ricky said, if we could find them. We go out every night looking, but we can never find them. You've built in markers? Yes, sure. Every single unit has a fluorescing module in the shell. They show up blue-green under UV light. So you go out at night looking for a patch of desert that glows blue-green. Right, and so far we haven't found it. That didn't really surprise me. If the cloud collapsed tightly, it would form a clump about 6 inches in diameter on the desert floor. And it was a big desert out there. They could easily miss it, night after night. But as I thought about it, there was another aspect that didn't make sense. Once the cloud fell to the ground, once the individual units lost power, then the cloud had no organization. It could be scattered by wind, like so many dust particles, never to reform. But evidently, that didn't happen. The units didn't scatter. Instead, the cloud returned day after day. Why was that? We think, Ricky said, that it may hide at night. Hide? Yeah, we think it goes to some protected area. Maybe an overhang or a hole in the ground. Something like that. I pointed to the cloud as it swirled toward us. You think that swarm is capable of hiding? I think it's capable of adapting. In fact, I know it is, he sighed. Anyway, it's more than just one swarm, Jack. There's more than one. There's at least 3, maybe more by now. I felt a momentary blankness, a kind of sleepy, gray confusion that washed over me. I suddenly couldn't think. I couldn't put it together. What are you saying? I'm saying it reproduces, Jack, he said. The fucking swarm reproduces. The camera now showed a ground-level view of the dust cloud as it swirled toward us, but as I watched, I realized it wasn't swirling like a dust devil. Instead, the particles were twisting one way, then another. in a kind of sinuous movement. They were definitely swarming. Swarming was a term for the behavior of certain social insects, like ants or bees, which swarmed whenever their hive moved to a new site. A cloud of bees will fly in one direction and then another, forming a dark river in the air. The swarm might halt and cling to a tree for perhaps an hour, perhaps overnight, before continuing onward. Eventually, the bees settled on a new location for their hive and stopped swarming. In recent years, programmers had written programs that modeled this insect behavior. Swarm intelligence algorithms had become an important tool in computer programming. To programmers, a swarm meant a population of computer agents that acted together to solve a problem by distributed intelligence. Swarming became a popular way to organize agents to work together. There were professional organizations and conferences devoted entirely to swarm intelligence programs. Lately, it had become a kind of default solution. If you couldn't code anything more inventive, you made your agents swarm. But as I watched, I could see this cloud was not swarming in any ordinary sense. The sinuous back and forth motion seemed to be only part of its movement. There was also a rhythmic expansion and contraction, a pulse, almost like breathing. And intermittently, the cloud seemed to thin out and rise higher, then to collapse down and become more squat. These changes occurred continuously, but in a repeating rhythm, or rather a series of superimposed rhythms. Shit, Ricky said. I don't see the others, and I know it's not alone. He pressed the radio again. Vince, you see any others? No, Ricky. Where are the others, guys? Speak to me. Radios crackled all over the facility. Bobby Lembeck, Ricky, it's alone. It can't be alone. Mei Sheng, Ricky, nothing else is registering out there. Just one swarm, Ricky. That was David Brooks. It can't be alone. Ricky was gripping the radio so tightly his fingers were right. He pressed the button. Vince, take the PPI up to 7. You sure? Do it. Well, alright. If you really think. Just skip the fucking commentary and do it. Ricky was talking about increasing the positive pressure inside the building to 7 pounds per square inch. All clean facilities maintained a positive pressure so that outside dust particles could not enter from any leak. They would be blown outward by the escaping air. But 1 or 2 pounds was enough to maintain that. 7 pounds of positive pressure was a lot. It was unnecessary to keep out passive particles. But of course, these particles weren't passive. Watching the cloud swirl and undulate as it came closer, I saw that parts of it occasionally caught the sunlight in a way that turned it a shimmering iridescent silver. Then the color faded and the swarm became black again. That had to be the piezo panels catching the sun, but it clearly demonstrated that the individual micro-units were highly mobile, since the entire cloud never turned silver at the same time, but only portions or bands. I thought you said the Pentagon was giving up on you, because you couldn't control this swarm in wind. Right, we couldn't. But you must have had strong wind in the last few days. Of course. Usually comes up in late afternoon. We had 10 knots yesterday. Why wasn't the swarm blown away? Because it figured that one out, Ricky said. Gloomily, it's adapted to it. How? Keep watching. You'll probably see it. Whenever the wind gusts, the swarm sinks, hangs near the ground. Then it rises up again once the wind dies down. This is emergent behavior. Right. Nobody programmed it. He bit his lip. Was he lying again? So you're telling me it's learned. Right. How can it learn? The agents have no memory. Well, that's a long story, Ricky said. They have memory? Yes, they have memory. Limited. We built it in. Ricky pressed the button on his radio. Anybody hear anything? The answers came back, crackling in his handset. Not yet. Nothing. No sounds. Not yet. I said to Ricky, it makes sounds? We're not sure. Sometimes it seems like it. We've been trying to record it. He flicked keys on the workstation, quickly shifting the monitor images, making them larger, one after another. He shook his head. I don't like this. That thing can't be alone, he said. I want to know where the others are. How do you know there are others? Because there always are, he chewed his lip, tensely, as he looked at the monitor. I wonder what it's up to now. We didn't have long to wait. In a few moments, the black swarm had come within a few yards of the building. Abruptly, it divided in two, and then divided again. Now there were 3 swarms, swirling side by side. Son of a bitch, Ricky said. It was hiding the others inside itself. He pushed his buttons again. Guys, we got all 3. And they're close. They were, in fact, too close to be seen by the ground view camera. Ricky switched to the overhead views. I saw 3 black clouds all moving laterally along the side of the building. The behavior seemed distinctly purposeful. What are they trying to do? I said. Get inside, Ricky said. Why? You'd have to ask them. But yesterday, one of them, suddenly from a clump of cactus near the building, a cotton-tailed rabbit sprinted away across the desert floor. Immediately, the 3 swarms turned and pursued it. Ricky switched the monitor view. We now watched at ground level. The 3 clouds converged on the terrified bunny, which was moving fast, a whitish blur on the screen. The clouds swirled after it with surprising speed. The behavior was clear. They were hunting. I felt a moment of irrational pride. Bird prey was working perfectly. Those swarms might as well be lionesses chasing a gazelle. So purposeful was their behavior. The swarms turned sharply, then split up, cutting off the rabbit's escape to the left and right. The behavior of the 3 clouds clearly appeared coordinated. Now they were closing in, and suddenly one of the swarms sank down, engulfing the rabbit. The other 2 swarms fell on it moments later. The resulting particle cloud was so dense, it was hard to see the rabbit anymore. Apparently, it had flipped onto its back, because I saw its hind legs kicking spasmodically, in the air above the cloud itself. I said, "They're killing it." "Yeah," Ricky said, nodding. "That's right." "I thought this was a camera swarm." "Yeah, well, how are they killing it?" "We don't know, Jack, but it's fast." I frowned. "So you've seen this before?" Ricky hesitated, bit his lip, didn't answer me, just stared at the screen. I said, "Ricky, you've seen this before." He gave a long sigh. "Yeah, well, the first time was yesterday. They killed a rattlesnake yesterday." "I thought they killed a rattlesnake yesterday." I said, "Jesus, Ricky." I thought of the men in the helicopter, talking about all the dead animals. I wondered if Ricky was telling me all he knew. Yeah, the rabbit no longer kicked. A single protruding foot trembled with small convulsions, and then was still. The cloud swirled low to the ground, around the animal, rising and falling slightly. This continued for almost a minute. I said, "What are they doing now?" Ricky shook his head. "I'm not sure, but they did this before, too. It almost looks like they're eating it." "I know," Ricky said. Of course that was absurd. Prey was just a biological analogy. As I watched the pulsing cloud, it occurred to me that this behavior might actually represent a program hang. I couldn't remember exactly what rules we had written. For individual units, after the goal was attained, real predators, of course, would eat their prey. But there was no analogous behavior for these microrobots. So perhaps the cloud was just swirling in confusion. If so, it should start moving again soon. Usually, when a distributed intelligence program stalled, it was a temporary phenomenon. Sooner or later, random environmental influences would cause enough units to act that they induced all the others to act too. Then the program would start up again. The units would resume goal seeking. This behavior was roughly what you saw in a lecture hall. After the lecture was over, the audience milled around for a while, stretching, talking to people close to them, or greeting friends, collecting coats and belongings. Only a few people left at once, and the main crowd ignored them. But after a certain percentage of the audience had gone, the remaining people would stop milling and begin to leave quickly. It was a kind of focus change. If I was right, then I should see something similar in the behavior of the cloud. The swirls should lose their coordinated appearance. There should be ragged wisps of particles rising into the air. Only then would the main cloud move. I glanced at the time clock in the corner of the monitor. How long has it been now? About 2 minutes. That wasn't particularly long for a stall, I thought. At one point, when we were writing Prey, we used the computer to simulate coordinated agents' behavior. We always restarted after a hang. But finally, we decided to wait and see. If the program was really permanently stalled, we found that the program might hang for as long as 12 hours before suddenly kicking off and coming back to life again. In fact, that behavior interested the neuroscientists because "they are starting," Ricky said. And they were. The swarms were beginning to rise up from the dead rabbit. I saw at once that my theory was wrong. There was no raggedness, no rising wisp. The three clouds rose up together smoothly. The behavior seemed entirely non-random and controlled. The clouds were swirled separately for a moment, then merged into one. Sunlight flashed on simmering silver. The rabbit lay motionless on its side. And then the swarm moved swiftly away, whooshing off into the desert. It shrank toward the horizon. In moments, it was gone. Ricky was watching me. What do you think? You've got a breakaway robotic nanoswarm that some idiot made self-powered and self-sustaining. You think we can get it back? No, I said. From what I've seen, there's not a chance in hell. Ricky sighed and shook his head. But you can certainly get rid of it, I said. You can kill it. We can? Absolutely. Really? His face brightened. Absolutely. And I meant it. I was convinced that Ricky was overstating the problem he faced. He hadn't thought it through. He hadn't done all he could do. I was confident that I could destroy the runaway swarm quickly. I expected that. I'd be done with the whole business by dawn tomorrow, at the very latest. That was how little I understood my adversary. Day 6, 10:11 a.m. In retrospect, I was right about one thing. It was vitally important to know how the rabbit had died. Of course, I know the reason now. I also know why the rabbit was attacked. But that first day at the laboratory, I didn't have the faintest notion of what had happened, and I could never have guessed the truth. None of us could have, at that point. Not even Ricky, not even Julia. It was 10 minutes after the swarms had gone and we were all standing in the storage room. The whole group had gathered there, tense and anxious. They watched me as I clipped a radio transmitter to my belt and pulled the headset over my head. The headset included a video camera mounted by my left ear. It took a while to get the video transmitter working right. Ricky said, "You're really going out there." "I am," I said. "I want to know what happened to that rabbit." I turned to the others. "Who's coming with me?" Nobody moved. Bobby Lembeck stared at the floor, hands in his pockets. David Brooks blinked rapidly and looked away. Ricky was inspecting his fingernails. I caught Rosie Castro's eye. She shook her head. "No fucking way, Jack." "Why not, Rosie?" "You saw it yourself. They're hunting." "Are they?" "Sure as hell looked like it." "Rosie," I said, "I trained you better than this. How can the swarms be hunting?" "We all saw it." She stuck her chin out stubbornly. "All three of the swarms hunting, coordinated." "But how?" I said. Now she frowned, looking confused. "What are you asking? There's no mystery. The agents can communicate. They can each generate an electrical signal, right?" I said. "How big a signal?" "Well," she shrugged. "How big, Rosie?" "It can't be much. The agent is only 5/100th of the thickness of a human hair. Can't be generating much of a signal, right?" "True." "And electromagnetic radiation decays according to the square of the radius, right?" Every school kid learned that fact in high school physics. As you moved away from the electromagnetic source, the strength faded fast, very fast. And what that meant was the individual agents could only communicate with their immediate neighbors, with agents very close to them, not to other swarms 20 or 30 yards away. Rosie's frown deepened. The whole group was frowning now, looking at each other uneasily. David Brooks coughed. "Then what did we see, Jack?" "You saw an illusion," I said firmly. "You saw 3 swarms acting independently, and you thought they were coordinated. But they're not. And I'm pretty certain that other things you believe about these swarms aren't true either." There was a lot I didn't understand about the swarms, and a lot I didn't believe. I didn't believe, for example, that the swarms were reproducing. I thought Ricky and the others must be pretty unnerved even to imagine it. After all, the 50 pounds of material they'd exhausted into the environment could easily count for the 3 swarms I had seen, and dozens more besides. I was guessing that each swarm consisted of 3 pounds of nanoparticles. That was roughly the rate of a large bee swarm. As for the fact that these swarms showed purposeful behavior, that was not in the least troubling. It was the intended result of low-level programming, and I didn't believe the swarms were coordinated. It simply wasn't possible, because the fields were too weak. Nor did I believe the swarms had the adaptive powers that Ricky attributed to them. I'd seen too many demos of robots carrying out some task, like cooperating to push a box around the room, which was interpreted by observers as intelligent behavior, when in fact the robots were stupid, minimally programmed, and cooperating by accident. A lot of behavior looked smarter than it was. As Charlie Davenport used to say, Ricky should thank God for that. And finally, I didn't really believe that the swarms were dangerous. I didn't think that a 3-pound cloud of nanoparticles could represent much of a threat to anything, not even a rabbit. I wasn't at all sure it had been killed. It seemed to recall that rabbits were nervous creatures, prone to die of fright, or the pursuing particles might have swarmed in through the nose and mouth, blocking the respiratory passages and choking the animal to death. If so, the death was accidental, not purposeful. Accidental death made more sense to me. In short, I thought that Ricky and the others had consistently misinterpreted what they saw. They'd spooked themselves. On the other hand, I had to admit that several unanswered questions nagged me. The first and most obvious was why the swarm had escaped their control. The original camera swarm was designed to be controlled by an RF transmitter beaming toward it. Now, apparently, the swarm ignored transmitted radio commands, and I didn't understand why. I suspected an error in manufacturing. The particles had probably been made incorrectly. Second was the question of the swarm's longevity. The individual particles were extremely small, subject to damage from cosmic rays. photochemical decay, dehydration of their protein chains, and other environmental factors. In the harsh desert, all the swarms should have shriveled up and died of old age many days ago. But they hadn't. Why not? Third, there was the problem of the swarm's apparent goal. According to Ricky, the swarms kept coming back to the main building. Ricky believed they were trying to get inside, but that didn't seem to be a reasonable agent goal. And I wanted to look at the program code to see what was causing it. Frankly, I suspected a bug in the code. And finally, I wanted to know why they had pursued the rabbit. Because Pred Prey didn't program units to become literal predators. It merely used a predator model to keep the agents focused and goal-oriented. Somehow that had changed, and the swarms now appeared to be actually hunting. That too was probably a bug in the code. To my mind, all these uncertainties came down to a single central question. How had the rabbit died? I didn't think it had been killed. I suspected that the rabbit's death was accidental, not purposeful. But we needed to find out. I adjusted my portable radio headset. With the sunglasses and the video camera mounted by the left eye, I picked up the plastic bag for the rabbit's body and turned to the others. Anybody's coming with me? There was an uncomfortable silence. Ricky said, "What's the bag for?" "To bring the rabbit back in." "No fucking way," Ricky said. "You want to go out there? That's your business. But you're not bringing that rabbit back here." "You've got to be kidding," I said. "I'm not. We run a level 6 clean environment here, Jack. That rabbit's filthy. Can't come in." "Alright then. We can sort in May's lab and..." "No way, Jack. Sorry. It's not coming through the first airlock." I looked at the others. They were all nodding their heads in agreement. "Alright then. I'll examine it out there." "You're really going to go out?" "Why not?" I looked at them, one after another. "I have to tell you guys, I think you've all got your knickers in a twist. The cloud's not dangerous. And yes, I'm going out." I turned to May. "Do you have a dissection kit or some kind that..." "I'll come with you," she said quietly. "Okay, thanks." I was surprised that May was the first to come around to my way of seeing things. But as the field biologist, she was probably better than the others at assessing real-world risk. In any case, her decisions seemed to break some tension in the room. The others visibly relaxed. May went off to get the dissecting tools and some lab equipment. That was when the phone rang. Vince answered it and turned to me. "You know somebody named Dr. Ellen Foreman?" "Yes, it was my sister. She's on the line." Vance handed me the phone and stepped back. I felt suddenly nervous. I glanced at my watch. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. Time for Amanda's morning's nap. She should be asleep in her crib by now. Then I remembered I had promised my sister I would call her at 11 o'clock to check in, to see how things were going. I said, "Hello, Ellen. Is everything all right?" "Sure, fine." A long, long sigh. "It's fine. I don't know how you do it is all. Tired? About as tired as I've ever felt. kids get off to school okay? Another sigh. Yes, in the car. Eric hit Nicole on the back, and she punched him on the ear. You've got to interrupt them if they start that, Ellen. So I'm learning, she said wearily. And the baby? How's her rash? Better. I'm using the ointment. Her movements okay? Sure. She's well coordinated for her age. Is there a problem I should know about? No, I said. I turned away from the group, lowered my voice. I meant, is she pooping okay? Behind me, I heard Charlie Davenport snicker. Copiously, Ellen said. She's sleeping now. I took her to the park for a while. She was ready to go down. Everything's okay at the house, except the pilot for the water heater went out. But the guy's coming to fix it. Good. Listen, Ellen, I'm in the middle of something here. Jack, Julia called from the hospital a few minutes ago. She was looking for you, When I said you'd gone to Nevada, she got pretty upset. Is that right? She said you didn't understand, and you were going to make it worse. Something like that. I think you better call her. She sounded agitated. Okay, I'll call. How are things going out there? You'll be back tonight? Not tonight, I said. Sometime tomorrow morning. Ellen, I have to go now. Call the kids at dinner time, if you can. They'd like to hear from you. Auntie Ellen is fine, but she's not Dad. You know what I mean. Okay, you'll eat at 6. About. I told her I'd try to call, and I hung up. May and I were standing by the double glass walls of the outer airlock, just inside the building entrance. Beyond the glass, I could see the solid steel fire door that led outside. Ricky was standing beside us, gloomy and nervous, watching as we made our final preparations. You sure this is necessary to go outside? It's essential. Why don't you and May wait until nightfall and go out then? Because the rabbit won't be there, I said. By nightfall, coyotes or hawks will have come and taken the carcass away. I don't know about that, Ricky said. We haven't seen any coyotes around here for a while. Oh, hell, I said impatiently, turning on my radio headset. In the time we've spent arguing about this, we could have been out and back already. See you, Ricky. I went through the glass door and stood in the airlock. The door hissed shut behind me. The air handlers whooshed briefly in the now familiar pattern, and then the fog glass slid open. I walked toward the steel fire door. Looking back, I saw May stepping into the airlock. I opened the fire door a crack. Harsh glaring sunlight laid a burning strip on the floor. I felt hot air on my face. Over the intercom, Ricky said, "Good luck, guys." I took a breath, pushed the door wider, and stepped out into the desert. The wind had dropped, and the mid-morning heat was stifling. Somewhere a bird chittered. Otherwise, it was silent. Standing by the door, I squinted in the glare of the sunlight. A shiver ran down my back. I took another deep breath. I was certain that the swarms were not dangerous. But now that I was outside, my theoretical inferences seemed to lose force. I must have caught Ricky's tension, because I was feeling distinctly uneasy. Now that I was outside, The rabbit carcass looked much farther away than I had imagined it. It was perhaps 50 yards from the door, half the length of a football field. The surrounding desert seemed barren and exposed. I scanned the shimmering horizon, looking for black shapes. I saw none. The fire door opened behind me, and May said, "Ready when you are, Jack." "Then let's do it." We set off towards the rabbit, feet crunching on the desert sand. We moved away from the building. Almost immediately, my heart began to pound, and I started to sweat. I forced myself to breathe deeply and slowly, working to stay calm. The sun was hot on my face. I knew I had let Ricky spook me, but I couldn't seem to help it. I kept glancing towards the horizon. May was a couple of steps behind me. I said, "How are you doing?" "I'll be glad when it's over." We were moving through a field of knee-high yellow cholla cactus. Their spines caught the sun here and there. A large barrel cactus stuck up from the floor like a bristling green thumb. Some small silent birds hopped on the ground beneath the cholla. As we approached, they took to the air, wheeling specks against the blue. They landed 100 yards away. At last we came to the rabbit, surrounded by a buzzing black cloud. Startled, I hesitated a step. "It just flies," May said. She moved forward and crouched down beside the carcass. Ignoring the flies, she pulled on a pair of rubber gloves and handed me a pair to put on. She placed a square sheet of plastic on the ground, securing it with a rock at each corner. She lifted the rabbit and set it down in the center of the plastic. She unzipped a little dissection kit and laid it open. I saw steel instruments glinting in sunlight, forceps, scalpel, several kinds of scissors. She also laid out a syringe and several rubber-topped test tubes in a row. Her movements were quick, practiced. She had done this before. I crouched down beside her. The carcass had no odor. Externally, I could see no sign of what had caused the death. The staring eye looked pink and healthy. May said, "Bobby, are you recording me?" Over the headset, I heard Bobby Lembeck say, "Move your camera down." May touched the camera mounted on her sunglasses. Little more. Good. That's enough." "Okay," May said. She turned the rabbit's body over in her hands, inspecting it from all sides. She dictated swiftly. "On external examination, the animal appears entirely normal. There is no sign of congenital anomaly or disease. The fur is thick and healthy in appearance. The nasal passages appear partially or entirely blocked. I note some fecal material excreted at the anus, but presume that is normal evacuation at the time of death." She flipped the animal onto its back and held the forepaws apart with her hands. "I need you, Jack." She wanted me to hold the paws for her. The carcass was still warm and had not begun to stiffen. She took the scalpel and swiftly cut down the exposed midsection. A red gash opened. Blood flowed. I saw bones of the rib cage and pinkish coils of intestines. May spoke continuously as she cut. Noting the tissue color and texture, she said to me, "Hold here," and I moved my one hand down to hold aside the slick intestine. With a single stroke of the scalpel, she sliced open the stomach. Muddy green liquid spilled out, and some pulpy material that seemed to be undigested fiber. The inner wall of the stomach appeared roughened, but May said that was normal. She ran her finger expertly around the stomach wall, then paused. Look here," she said. "What?" "There." She pointed in several places. The stomach was reddish, bleeding slightly, as if it had been rubbed raw. I saw black patches in the midst of the bleeding. "That's not normal," May said. "That's pathology." She took a magnifying glass and peered closer, then dictated. "I observed dark areas, approximately 4 to 8 millimeters in diameter, which I presume to be clusters of nanoparticles present in the stomach lining," she said. "These clusters are found in associations with mild bleeding of the villus wall." "There are nanoparticles in the stomach," I said. "How did they get there? Did the rabbit eat them? Swallow them involuntarily? I doubt it. I would assume they entered actively." I frowned. "You mean they crawled down the esophagus?" "Yes. At least I think so." "Why would they do that?" "I don't know." She never paused in her swift dissection. She took scissors and cut upward through the breastbone, then pushed the rib cage open with her fingers. "Hold here." I moved my hands to hold the ribs open as she had done. The edges of bone were sharp. With my other hand, I held the hind legs open. May worked between my hands. "The lungs are bright pink and firm. Normal appearance." She cut one lobe with the scalpel, then again and again. Finally, she exposed the bronchial tube and cut it open. It was dark black on the inside. Bronchi show heavy infestation with nanoparticles, consistent with inhalation of swarm elements. She said, dictating. "You getting this, Bobby?" "Getting it all. Video resolution is good." She continued to cut upward, following the bronchial tree toward the throat. And she continued cutting into the throat, and then from the nose, back across the cheek, then opening the mouth. I had to turn away from a moment, but she continued calmly to dictate. "I am observing heavy infiltration of all the nasal passages and pharynx. This is suggestive of partial or full airway obstruction, which in turn may indicate the cause of death." I looked back. What? The rabbit's head was hardly recognizable. Any longer she had cut the jaw free, and was now peering down the throat. "Have a look for yourself," she said. "There seems to be dense particles closing the pharynx, in a response that looks something like an allergic reaction or..." Then Ricky, "Say, are you guys going to stay out much longer?" "As long as it takes," I said. I turned to May. "What kind of allergic reaction?" "Well," she said, "you see this area of tissue and how swollen it is? And you see how it turns gray, which is suggestive. You realize, Ricky said, that you've been out there for minutes already. We're only out here because we can't bring the rabbit back, I said. That's right, you can't. May was shaking her head as she listened to this. Ricky, you're not helping here. Bobby said, Don't shake your head, May. You're moving the camera back and forth. Sorry. But I saw her raise her head, as if she was looking toward the horizon. And while she did so, she uncorked a test tube and slipped a slice of stomach lining into the glass. She put it in her pocket. Then she looked back down. No one watching the video would have seen what she did. She said, All right, we'll take blood samples now. Blood's all you're bringing in here, guys, Ricky said. Yes, Ricky, we know. May reached for the syringe, stuck the needle into an artery, drew a blood sample, expelled it into a plastic tube, popped the needle one-handed, put on another, and drew a second sample from a vein. Her pace never slowed. I said, I have the feeling you've done this before. This is nothing. In Sichuan, we were always working in heavy snowstorms. You can't see what you're doing. Your hands are freezing. The animal's frozen solid. Can't get a needle in. She set the tubes of blood aside. Now we will just take a few cultures and we're done. She flipped over her case, looking. Oh, bad luck. What's that? I said. The culture swabs aren't here. But you had them inside. Yes, I'm sure of it. I said, Ricky, you see the swabs anywhere? Yes, they're right here by the airlocks. You want to bring them out to us? Oh, sure, guys. He laughed harshly. No way I'm going out there in daylight. You want 'em? You come and get 'em. May said to me, You want to go? No, I said. I was already holding the animal open. My hands were in position. All right here. You go. Okay. She got to her feet. Try and keep the flies off. We don't want any more contamination than necessary. I'll be back in a moment. She moved off at a light jog toward the door. I heard her footsteps fade, then the clang of the metal door shutting behind her, then silence. Attracted by the slit-open carcass, the flies came back in force, buzzing around my head, trying to land on the exposed guts. I released the rabbit's hind legs and swatted the flies away with one hand. I kept myself busy with the flies, so I wouldn't think about the fact that I was alone out here. I kept glancing off in the distance, but I never saw anything. I kept brushing away the flies, and occasionally my hand touched against the rabbit's fur. And that was when I noticed that beneath the fur, the skin was bright red. Bright red, exactly like a bad sunburn. Just seeing it made me shiver. I spoke into my headset. Bobby. Crackle. Yes, Jack? Can you see the rabbit? Yes, Jack. You see the redness of the skin? Are you picking that up? Just a minute. I heard a soft swirl by my temple. Bobby was controlling the camera remotely. Zooming in. The whirring stopped. I said, Can you see this? Through my camera. There was no answer. Bobby. I heard murmurs, whispers. Well, maybe it was static. Bobby, are you there? Silence. I heard nothing. I heard breathing. Jack? Now it was the voice of David Brooks. You better go in. May hasn't come back yet. Where is she? May's inside. Well, I have to wait. She's going to do cultures. No. Come in now, Jack. I let go of the rabbit and got to my feet. I looked around, scanned the horizon. I don't see anything. They're on the other side of the building, Jack. His voice was calm, but I felt a chill. They are? Come inside now, Jack. I bent over, picked up May's samples, her dissection kit lying beside the rabbit's carcass. The black leather of the kit was hot from the sun. Jack, just a minute. Jack, stop fucking around. I started toward the steel door, my feet crunching on the desert floor. I didn't see anything at all, but I heard something. It was a peculiar low thumbing sound. At first, I thought I was hearing machinery, but the sound rose and fell, pulsing like a heartbeat. Other beats were superimposed, along with some kind of hissing, creating a strange, unworldly quality, like nothing I'd ever heard. When I look back on it now, I think that more than anything else, it was the sound that made me afraid. I walked faster. I said, "Where are they? Coming. Where? Jack, you better run." What? Run. I still couldn't see anything, but the sound was building in intensity. I broke into a jog. The frequency of the sound was so low, I felt it as a vibration in my body. But I could hear it, too, the thumping, irregular pulse. Run, Jack. I thought, fuck it, and I ran. Swirling and glinting silver, the first swarm came around the corner of the building. The hissing vibration was coming from the cloud, sliding along the side of the building. It moved toward me. It would reach the door long before I could. I looked back to see a second swarm as it came around the far end of the building. It, too, moved toward me. The heads crackled. I heard David Brooks. "Jack, you can't make it." "I see that," I said. The first swarm had already reached the door and was standing in front of it, blocking my way. I stopped, uncertain what to do. I saw a stick on the ground in front of me, a big one, 4 feet long. I picked it up, swung it in my hand. The swarm pulsed, but did not move from the door. The second swarm was still coming toward me. It was time for a diversion. I was familiar with the Pred-Prey code. I knew the swarms were programmed to pursue moving targets. If they seemed to be fleeing from them, what would make a good target? I cocked my arm and threw the black dissection kit high into the air in the general direction of the second swarm. The kit landed on edge and tumbled across the ground for a moment. Immediately, the second swarm began to go after it. At the same moment, the first swarm moved away from the door, also pursuing the kit. It was just like a dog chasing a ball. I felt a moment of elation as I watched it go. It was, after all, just a programmed swarm. I thought, this is child's play. I hurried toward the door. That was a mistake, because apparently my hasty movement triggered the swarm, which immediately stopped and strolled backwards to the door again, blocking my path. There it remained, pulsing streaks of silver, like a blade glinting in the sun, blocking my path. It took me a moment to realize the significance of that. My movement hadn't triggered the swarm to pursue me. The swarm hadn't chased me at all. Instead, it had moved to block my way. It was anticipating my movement. That wasn't in the code. The swarm was inventing new behavior, appropriate to the situation. Instead of pursuing me, it had fallen back and trapped me. It had gone beyond its programming, way beyond. I couldn't see how that had happened. I thought it must be some kind of random reinforcement, because the individual particles had very little memory. The intelligence of the swarm was necessarily limited. It shouldn't be that difficult to outsmart it. I tried to feint to the left, then the right. The cloud went with me, but only for a moment. Then it dropped back to the door again, as if it knew that my goal was the door, and by staying there, it would succeed. That was far too clever. There had to be additional programming they hadn't told me about. I said into the headset, "What the hell have you guys done with these things?" David, "It's not going to let you get past Jack." Just hearing him say that irritated me. "You think so? We'll see." Because my next step was obvious. Close to the ground like this, the swarm was structurally vulnerable. It was a cluster of particles, no larger than specks of dust. If I disrupted the cluster, if I broke up its structure, then the particles would have to reorganize themselves, just as a scattered flock of birds would reform in the air. That would take at least a few seconds, and in that time, I would be able to get through the door. But how to disrupt it? I swung the stick in my hand, hearing it whoosh through the air, but it was clearly unsatisfactory. I needed something with a much bigger flat surface, like a paddle or a palm frond. Something to create a large disrupting wind. My mind was racing. I needed something. Behind me, the second cloud was closing in. It moved toward me in an erratic zigzag pattern, to cut off any attempt I might make to run past it. I watched with a kind of horrified fascination. I knew that this too had never been coded in the program. This was self-organized emergent behavior, and its purpose was only too clear. It was stalking me. The pulsing sound grew louder as the swarm came closer and closer. I had to disrupt it. Turning in a circle, I looked at the ground all around me. I saw nothing I could use. The nearest juniper tree was too far away. The cholla cactuses were flimsy. I thought, of course, there's nothing out here. It's a fucking desert. I scanned the exterior of the building, hoping someone had left out an implement, like a rake. Nothing. Nothing at all. I was out here with nothing but the shirt on my back, and there was nobody that could help me to. Of course. The headset crackled. Jack listened, but I didn't hear any more after that. As I pulled my shirt over my head, the headset came away, falling to the ground, and then, holding the shirt in my hand, I swung it in broad whooshing arcs through the air, and screaming like a banshee, I charged and swarmed by the door. The swarm vibrated with a deep thumping sound. It flattened slightly as I ran toward it, and then I was in the midst of the particles and plunged into an odd semi-darkness, like being in a dust storm. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the door. I groped blindly from the doorknob, and my eyes stung from the particles, but I kept stringing my shirt in broad whooshing arcs, and in a moment the darkness began to fade. I was dispersing the cloud, sending particles spinning off in all directions. My vision was clearing, and my breathing was still okay, though my throat felt dry and painful. I began to feel thousands of tiny pinpricks all over my body, but they hardly hurt. Now I could see the door in front of me. The doorknob was just to my left. I kept swinging my eyes shut, and suddenly the cloud seemed to clear entirely away, almost as if it was moving out of range of my disruption. In that instant, I slipped through the door and slammed it shut behind me. I blinked in sudden darkness. I could hardly see. I thought my eyes would adjust from the glare of the sunlight, and I waited a moment, but my vision did not improve. Instead, it seemed to be getting worse. I could just make out the glass doors of the airlock directly ahead. I still felt the stinging pinpricks all over my skin. My throat was dry and my breathing was raspy. I coughed. My vision was dimming. I started to feel dizzy. On the other side of the airlock, Ricky and May stood watching me. I heard Ricky shout, "Come on, Jack, hurry!" My eyes burned painfully. My dizziness grew rapidly worse. I leaned against the wall to keep from falling over. My throat felt thick. I was having difficulty breathing. Gasping, I waited for the glass doors to open, but they remained closed. I stared stupidly at the airlock. "You have to stand in front of the doors. Stand!" I felt like the world was in slow motion. All my strength was gone. My body felt weak and shaky. The stinging was worse. The room was getting darker. I didn't think I could stand up on my own. "Stand, Jack." Somehow, I shoved away from the wall and lurched toward the airlock. With a hiss, the glass doors slid open. "Go, Jack, now." I saw spots before my eyes. I was dizzy and sick to my stomach. I stumbled into the airlock, banging against the glass as I stepped inside. With every second that passed it was harder to breathe. I knew I was suffocating. Outside the building, I heard the low thumbing sound start up again. I turned slowly to look back. The glass doors hissed shut. I looked down at my body, but could barely see it. My skin appeared black. I was covered in dust. My body ached. My shirt was black with dust, too. The spray stung me, and I closed my eyes. Then the ear handlers started up, whooshing loudly. I saw the dust sucked off my shirt. My vision was clearer, but I still couldn't breathe. The shirt slipped from my hand, flattening against the grate at my feet. I bent to reach down for it. My body began to shake, tremble. I heard only the roar of the handlers. I felt a wave of nausea. My knees buckled. I sagged against the wall. I looked at May and Ricky through the second glass doors. They seemed far away. As I watched, they receded even farther, moving away into the distance. Soon they were too far away for me to worry any longer. I knew I was dying. As I closed my eyes, I fell to the ground, and the roar of the air handlers faded into cold and total silence. Day 6, 11:12 a.m. Don't move. Something icy cold coursed through my veins. I shuddered. Jack, don't move. Just for a second, okay? Something cold, a cold liquid running up my arm. I opened my eyes. The light was directly overhead, glaring, greenish bright. I winced. My whole body ached. I felt like I'd been beaten. I was lying on my back on the black counter of May's biology lab. Squinting in the glare, I saw May standing beside me, bent over my left arm. She had an intravenous line in my elbow. What's going on? Jack, please, don't move. I've only done this on lab animals. That's reassuring. I lifted my head to see what she was doing. My temples throbbed. I groaned and lay back. May said, Feel bad? Terrible. I'll bet. I had to inject you with 3 times. With what? You were in anaphylactic shock, Jack. You had a severe allergic reaction. Your throat almost closed up. Allergic reaction, I said. That's what it was. Severe one. It was from the swarm. She hesitated for a moment. Then, of course. Would nano-sized particles cause an allergic reaction like that? They certainly could, I said. But you don't think so? No, I don't. I think the nanoparticles are genetically inert. I think you reacted to a coliform toxin. A coliform toxin? My throbbing headache came in waves. I took a breath, let it out slowly. I tried to figure out what she was saying. My mind was slow. My head hurt. A coliform toxin. Right. A toxin from E. coli bacteria? Is that what you mean? Right. Proteolytic toxin, probably. And where would a toxin like that come from? From the swarm, she said. That made no sense at all. According to Ricky, the E. coli bacteria were only used to manufacture precursor molecules. But bacteria wouldn't be present in the swarm itself, I said. I don't know, Jack. I think they could be. Why was she so diffident? I wondered. It wasn't like her. Ordinarily, May was precise, sharp. Well, I said, somebody knows. The swarm's been designed. Bacteria's either been designed in or not. I heard her sigh, as if I just wasn't getting it. But what wasn't I getting? I said. Did you salvage the particles that were blown off in the airlock? Did you keep the stuff from the airlock? No. All the airlock particles were incinerated. Was that a smart? It's built into the system, Jack. As a safety feature. We can't override it. Okay. Now it's my turn to sigh. So we didn't have any examples of swarm agents to study. I started to sit up, but she put a gentle hand on my chest, restraining me. Take it slowly, Jack. She was right, because sitting up made my headache much worse. I swung my feet over the side of the table. How long was I out? 12 minutes. I feel like I was beaten up. My ribs ached with every breath. You had a lot of trouble breathing. I still do. I reached for a Kleenex and blew my nose. A lot of black stuff came out, mixed with blood and dust from the desert. I had to blow my nose 4 or 5 times to clear it. I crumpled the Kleenex and started to throw it away. May held out her hand. I'll take that. No, it's okay. Give it to me, Jack. She took the Kleenex and slipped it into a little plastic bag and sealed it. That was when I realized how stupidly my mind was working. Of course that Kleenex would contain exactly the particles I wanted to study. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and waited for the throbbing in my head to ease up a little. When I opened my eyes again, the glare in the room was less bright. It almost looked normal. By the way, May said, Julia just called. She said you can't call her back. Something about some tests, but she wanted to talk to you. Uh-huh. I watched May take the Kleenex bag and put it inside a sealed jar. She screwed down the lid tightly. May, I said, if there's E. coli in the swarm, we can find out by looking at that right now. Shouldn't we do that? I can't right now. I will as soon as I can. I'm having a little trouble with one of the fermentation units, and I needed the microscopes for that. What kind of trouble? I'm not sure yet. But yields are falling in one tank. She shook her head. It's probably nothing serious. These things happen all the time. This whole manufacturing process is incredibly delicate, Jack. Keeping it going is like juggling 100 balls at once. I have my hands full. I nodded. But I was starting to think that the real reason she wasn't looking at the Kleenex was that she already knew the swarm contained bacteria. She just didn't think it was her place to tell me that. And if that's what was going on, then she never would tell me. May, I said, somebody has to tell me what's going on here. Not Ricky. I want somebody to really tell me. Good, she said. I think that's a very good idea. That was how I found myself sitting in front of a computer workstation in one of those small rooms. The project engineer, David Brooks, sat beside me. As he talked, David continuously straightened his clothes. He smoothed his tie, shot his cuffs, snugged his collar, pulled up the creases in his trousers from his thighs. Then he crossed one ankle over his knee, pull up his sock, cross the other ankle, run his hands over his shoulders, brushing away imaginary dust, and then start over again. It was all unconscious, of course, and with my headache, I might have found it irritating, But I didn't focus on it, because with every piece of new information David gave me, my headache got worse and worse. Unlike Ricky, David had a very organized mind, and he told me everything. Starting from the beginning, Zymos had contracted to make a micro-robotic swarm that would function as an aerial camera. The particles were successfully manufactured and worked indoors. But when they were tested outside, they lacked mobility in wind. The test swarm was blown away in a strong breeze. That was 6 weeks ago. You tested more swarms after that, I said. Yes, many. Over the next 4 weeks or so. None worked? Right, none worked. So those original swarms are all gone, blown away by the wind, yes. Which means the runaway swarms that we see now have nothing to do with your original test swarms, correct. They are a result of contamination. David blinked rapidly. What do you mean, contamination? The 25 kilos of material that was blown by the exhaust fan into the environment because of a missing filter. Who said it was 25 kilos? Ricky did. Oh no, Jack, David said. We vented stuff for days. We must have vented 500 or 600 kilos of contaminants. Bacteria, molecules, assemblers. So Ricky had been understating the situation again. But I didn't understand why he bothered to lie about this. After all, it was just a mistake. And as Ricky had said, it was the contractor's mistake. Okay, I said. And you saw the first of these desert swarms when? 2 weeks ago, David said, nodding and smoothing his tie. He explained that at first, the swarm was so disorganized that when it first appeared, they thought it was a cloud of desert insects, gnats or something. It showed up for a while, going here and there around the laboratory building, and then it was gone. It seemed like a random event. A swarm appeared again a couple of days later, he said, and by then it was much better organized. It displayed distinctive swarming behavior. That sort of swirling in the cloud that you've seen. So it was clear that it was our stuff. And what happened then? The swarm swirled around the desert near the installation. Like before, it came and went. For the next few days, we tried to gain control of it by radio, but we never could. And eventually, about a week after that, we found that none of the cars would start. He paused. I went out there to have a look, and I found that all the onboard computers were dead. These days, all automobiles have microprocessors built into them. They control everything from fuel injections to radios and door locks. But now the computers were not functioning. Yeah, actually the processor chips themselves were fine, but the memory chips had eroded. They'd literally turned to dust. I thought, oh shit, I said. Could you figure out why? Sure, it wasn't any big mystery, Jack. The erosion had the characteristic signature of gamma assemblers. You know about that? No. Well, we have 9 different assemblers involved in manufacturing. Each assembler has a different function. The gamma assemblers break down carbon material in silicate layers. They actually cut at the nano level, slicing out chunks of carbon substrate. So these assemblers cut the memory chips In the cause. Right. But, David hesitated. He was acting as if I were missing the point. He tugged at his cuffs, fingered his collar. The thing you have to keep in mind, Jack, is that these assemblers can work at room temperature. If anything, the desert heat's even better for them. Hotter is more efficient. For a moment, I didn't understand what he was talking about. What difference did it make about room temperature or desert heat? What did that have to do with memory chips in cars? And then suddenly, finally, the penny dropped. Holy shit, I said. He nodded, yeah. Dave was saying that a mixture of components had been vented into the desert, and that these components, which were designed to self-assemble in the fabrication structure, would also self-assemble in the outside world. Assembly could be carried out autonomously in the desert, and obviously that's exactly what was happening. I ticked the points off to make sure I had it right. Basic assembly begins with a bacteria. They've been engineered to eat anything, even garbage, so they can find something in the desert to live off of, right? Which means the bacteria multiply and begin churning out molecules that self-combine, forming larger molecules. Pretty soon you have assemblers, and the assemblers begin to do the final work and turn out new microagents, right. Which means that the swarms are reproducing, yes they are, and the individual agents have memory, yes a small amount, and they don't need much. That's the whole point of distributed intelligence. It's collective. So they have intelligence, and since they have memory, they can learn from experience, yes. And the Pred-Prey program means they can solve problems. And the program generates enough random elements to let them innovate. Right, yes. My head throbbed. I was seeing all the implications now, and they weren't good. So I said, what you're telling me is this swarm reproduces, is self-sustaining, learns from experience, has collective intelligence, and can innovate to solve problems? Yes. Which means for all practical purposes, it's alive. Yes, David nodded. And finally, at least it behaves as if it is alive. Functionally, it's alive, Jack. I said, this is very fucking bad news. Brooks said, tell me. I'd like to know, I said, why this thing wasn't destroyed a long time ago. David said nothing. He just smoothed his tie and looked uncomfortable. Because you realize, I said, that you're talking about a mechanical plague. That's what you've got here. It's just like a bacterial plague or a viral plague, except it's mechanical organisms. You've got a fucking man-made plague. He nodded yes. That's evolving, yes. It's not limited to biological rates of evolution. It's probably evolving much faster. He nodded. It is evolving faster. How much faster, David? Brooks sighed. Pretty damn fast. It'll be different this afternoon when it comes back. Will it comes back? It always does. And how and why does it come back? I said. It's trying to get inside. And why is that? David shifted uncomfortably. We have only the theories, Jack. Try me. One possibility is that it's a territorial thing. As you know, the original Pred-Prey code includes a concept of a range, of a territory in which the predators will roam. and within that core range, it defines a sort of home base, which the swarm may consider to be the inside of this facility. I said, "You believe that?" "Not really, no," he hesitated. "Actually," he said, "most of us think that it comes back looking for your wife, Jack. It's looking for Julia."